Okay, this video deals with the second major scandal emerging from the 2017 UCP leadership contest. This scandal deals with identity theft and voter fraud. The previous video dealt with the Callaway kamikaze candidacy scandal. I'm going to say a few words about the previous scandal because over the last week there's been a number of developments related to that. I may have to do an entire update on that, but for present purposes I'll mention that tomorrow, April 1st at 2 o'clock at Court of Queen's Bench in Calgary, Kenney, Callaway and Company are going to be pursuing an injunction to stop the election commissioner's investigation into the Callaway campaign. There are 6 applicants, Callaway and his wife, 3 more fake donors, and Robin Lohr, whom we met in the last video. Their hope, obviously, is if they can delay the investigation until the election, hopefully Premier Kenney can then fire the commissioner. That is not going to save them from the RCMP investigation, but I think they're trying to avoid any more embarrassing information coming out during the campaign. But we'll see how that goes. Excuse me. Also last week, a couple of news stories brought up recently released memos from the Callaway campaign. One of them has Callaway 2 weeks into his campaign casually talking about his resignation date, again providing evidence for the fact that the Callaway campaign was not a serious campaign but an instrument of the Kenney campaign. The second memo is even more of a gem. It's got Kenney's deputy chief of staff emailing Callaway on the day of Callaway's resignation with a complete printout of what Callaway's resignation speech will be, again affirming that Team Callaway was entirely a subsidiary of Team Kenney. Also last week, Hardell Man, or Happy Man as he's called, he received a $9,000 fine from the election commissioners. Man has been a very cooperative witness for the investigators. However, he was formerly one of the central co-conspirators in Kenney's inner clique. His fines make for 6 now people who have been either fined or reprimanded for involvement in a money laundering scheme that was financing Callaway's campaign, and all 6 of those people were Kenney people. Today's scandal is the identity theft voter fraud scandal, and it was first articulated by former UCP MLA Prab Gill. However, he was not the first person to make the accusation, and the evidence since he made his accusation has been just mounting almost on a daily basis. After he became UCP leader, Jason Kenney ejected Gill from the party over allegations that Gill had been involved in ballot stuffing at a constituency association election. Gill admitted and then retracted guilt. Kenney threatened to bankrupt Gill in court if Gill did not leave the party. Obviously, Gill felt that the accusations he stood accused of were minor compared to what he had witnessed Kenney commit during the UCP leadership campaign. In a February 11, 2019 letter to RCMP Deputy Commissioner Curtis Zablocki, Gill outlined an elaborate scam that ran from the beginning of the 2017 leadership convention contest, July 22nd, to the very end, the final vote tally, October 28, 2017. First, a few words about the basic structure of the vote. Members of both legacy parties, Wild Rose and PCs, automatically became members of the UCP upon the merger of the 2 parties on July 22nd. For the purposes of the leadership contest, new membership sales were allowed from July 22nd to September the 29th. To register to vote in the election, the leadership election, all members had to fill out voter registration forms, and on those forms there was a box for email address, and that was where the members were going to receive their personal identification numbers, their PIN numbers, which would allow them to vote on election days, and the entire vote took place online. For members without email addresses, they could receive their PIN numbers via phone or text, etc. Between July 22nd and September 29th, a whopping 23,000 new memberships were sold. That was largely the handiwork of Team Kenney, which had vastly more money than the other campaigns, and which had an estimated 700 staffers, both paid and volunteer. In violation of party rules, Team Kenney was engaged in bulk membership purchases with funds supplied by anonymous parties. In violation of the Elections Act and the Criminal Code, and here we get into the core of this scam, Team Kenney's voter registration drive had a clandestine operation mainly targeting seniors and English second language folk who did not have email addresses. In those instances, Team Kenney would attach their own email addresses to those people's voter registration forms. Those email addresses went to offshore servers that only Team Kenney had access to. When the UCP Central Election Committee emailed out everyone's PIN numbers, Team Kenney intercepted thousands of these and then later voted using those people's identities. Throughout the 3-day election process, one Team Kenney squad, led by UCP candidate Whitney Izzik, operated a voting kiosk in a warehouse in Balzac, Alberta, which is just north of Calgary. Other Kenney kiosks were situated across the province. These kiosks cast thousands of votes. Gill also recalls a Team Kenney member coming to his constituency office during the vote with a brief list of PIN numbers and asking Gill if it would be acceptable for him to place votes using Gill's computers at his constituency office, and Gill refused. Of 61,600 registered voters, 58,230 voted. And that is an unheard of, incredible 95% turnout. Party executive and top Kenney enforcer Janice Harrington had miraculously predicted beforehand about a 95% turnout. Yet Gill claims those of us in politics kept hearing from people who say they never got their voting credentials and could not vote. This is corroborated by former Livingstone-Macleod UCP Constituency Board President Maureen Moncrief. She says, I had members that didn't get their PINs. She also goes on to say that she had members who told her that when they called the helpline to complain that they didn't get their PINs, they were directly asked, who are you voting for? And quote, if they said Brian Jean, they were hung up on. Irregularities aroused suspicion during the vote. Both Brian Jean and third contestant Doug Schweitzer demanded the voting be stopped. On October 27th, the helpline was jammed. Janice Harrington arbitrarily sent out 1,500 new PINs, and it is unclear if any of those PINs went to members for whom votes had already been cast. Janice Harrington and Election Committee Chair Robin Henwood and interim UCP party leader Nathan Cooper brushed aside all worries. Election Committee Chair Henwood offered 3 defenses to the vote's integrity. Firstly, she poo-pooed any talk of fraud. Quote, the only people who could possibly do this, commit fraud, are the campaigns themselves. I do not doubt their integrity at all. There is no way they would commit fraud. At the moment she said that, 2 of the 3 remaining campaigns were crying foul. The suspect was obvious. Henwood was basically saying, Jason Kenney's integrity is beyond reproach. Secondly, Henwood claimed the computer system had an IP tracking feature that prevented excessive voting from any one computer. Computers have internet protocols, IPs, which function as signatures. The election's central computer would not receive more than 5 votes from any one IP. Incidentally, the computer system used during the election was the one that the PCs used during their unification referendum. This was Kenney's computer system. Regardless of that, virtual private networks, VPNs, are commercially available software programs that disguise a computer's IP. For example, the company Tunnel Bear sells an app which for $60 a year promises to keep the customer's internet browsing habits a secret. Installing a VPN like Tunnel Bear would have allowed someone to vote more than 5 times during the 2017 UCP Leadership Convention. Schweitzer and Jean both thought that Team Kenney was using VPNs. During the vote, Schweitzer declared, "Secret use of software to falsify the sender's IP address, expressly designed for the purpose of evading detection, is an obvious badge of suspicious behavior." Kenney's people rebuked any such suggestion. A screenshot has since surfaced of a message sent during the vote whereby one Team Kenney member is telling another Team Kenney member to download Tunnel Bear explicitly so that she can vote more than 5 times. When this became public, February 2019, Kenney changed his story. He now claims that all of the campaigns used VPNs to allow the seniors to vote. Upon hearing that, Brian Jean immediately tweeted, "My team never cheated, never used VPNs, never used voter kiosks." The third defense of the election's integrity was the audit, which Kenney boasts was the most thorough in Canadian history. Leadership elections are usually audited by large outfits like Deloitte, who import bean counters from afar to avoid any hint of conflict. Contrary to this protocol, the UCP hired Dorward & Company, an Edmonton-based boutique accounting firm. While firm founder Dave Dorward sold his interest in the business to his son Spencer in 2015, Dave Dorward keeps a desk at the office, he retains the title of senior associate, and he continues to represent Dorward & Company at business conventions. Dave Dorward is a former PC MLA. He is a current UCP candidate. Dave Dorward, 3 days before the vote, hosted a pro-Kenney rally. Spencer Dorward and his wife are both UCP donors. In short, in other words, there never was an independent audit. Estranged Kenney co-conspirator Happy Man contends the party tops knew well about the fraud, the voter fraud. Mann confirms that many from the Punjabi community, often seniors without email addresses, had their memberships paid for by third parties, and that Kenney and company were well aware of this as well. Mann also recalls members' forms that he handed in suddenly and mysteriously acquired email addresses after he handed them in. An investigation by CBC News uncovered dozens of email addresses attached to UCP members' forms that had been anonymously and nearly simultaneously registered in the run-up to the vote. These email addresses have domain names linking them to the same obscure offshore web host. A lawsuit filed by Tariq Chaudhry, past president of the Edmonton Canadian Pakistani Association, claims that Kenney met Chaudhry in July 2017 in an Edmonton hotel room. There, Kenney offered Chaudhry an Edmonton constituency if Chaudhry signed up and paid for 1,200 UCP memberships and hosted community events whereat Kenney would be the honored guest. Chaudhry signed up and purchased 600 UCP memberships. He spent $21,000 of his own money on banquets to celebrate Kenney, only to be told by Kenney that due to a past unfair labor practices dispute that Chaudhry had been involved in, he was not a suitable UCP candidate. Chaudhry's story joins other tales of bulk membership purchases with funds furnished by other people. This practice should completely vitiate that member's rights to vote in any leadership election. That practice obviously facilitates wholesale identity theft. These bulk purchased membership lists were hunting grounds for Team Kenney operatives looking for people without email addresses and who were unlikely to cause a serious fuss if they never got their PIN numbers. Voter fraud, it appears, occurred on an industrial scale. These are not mere Election Act violations. These are violations of criminal code provisions regarding identity theft and fraud. Despite the gravity of these allegations, the media, until a few days ago at least, was mainly focused on the lesser of the two scandals, the Callaway kamikaze candidacy scandal, possibly because that scandal, the evidence for that one is absolutely incontrovertible at this point. The Alberta Election Commissioner has had an in-house team investigating both scandals now for 5 months. They have been joined by 2 retired veteran white-collar crime detectives. In mid-March, they were all joined by the Serious Crimes Branch of RCMP K Division. Never mind the UCP spin, Kenney is the target of a major criminal probe. The gears of justice grind slowly but inexorably. These scandals will survive a Kenney election victory. Firing the election commissioner is not going to stop these gears from grinding.